Hey everybody, welcome back to Politigood. I'm Tim Fullerton.
And I'm Rachel Parker.
And I'm really excited about our guest today. Joining us will be Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine, who is going to be talking to us about what happened in the election, but also a lot of the really great things that are happening in New York City that a lot of people don't know about. And I think people will be really, really excited to hear the progress that we're making in the city, partially due to Mark and others. So we're going to just dive right into it. So Mark, I'm going to say a little bit about you first, because your background is crazy impressive. So you've been Manhattan Borough President for 2 years. And before that, you were on the city council for 8 years, I believe. And I could go through all the legislation you got passed, but like there's too much here to list. Really, really amazing stuff. Worked on the campaign to curb congestion, which we'll be talking about. And was a public school teacher as well, and also created the Neighborhood Trust Federal Credit Union, which has given out over $25 million in small loans to low-income families and small businesses in northern Manhattan. Mark, thanks for joining Politigood.
Tim and Rachel, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited about this show and honored to be one of your first guests.
Well, thanks for being here. So we're gonna dive into some less pleasant stuff first, and then we're gonna get into some of the really good stuff. But obviously, we had a seismic election 3 weeks ago today, actually, and this didn't only just affect the battleground states. New York City itself, actually, the margins were much slimmer across, I think, every borough. And I know you've talked a lot about this on social media, and I would just love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on why that happened, and how do we gain those voters back?
Well, the state in America which had the biggest shift to Trump was New York. We had a movement of 11 or 12 points statewide. And if you zoom in on New York City, it's even worse. We had a 16-point swing to Trump here. But what's really shocking is the neighborhood level results, where you see, not in places like the Upper East Side or Park Slope, which are wealthier, whiter areas, for those who don't know New York, but in places like northern Manhattan, in the West Bronx, in parts of Queens like Flushing and Richmond Hills, parts of Brooklyn like Bensonhurst, which for those who don't know are all working class communities of color. In those neighborhoods, we saw a massive swing to Trump, where communities where Republicans generally didn't even break into double digits, Trump broke 35 and 40%. The borough of the Bronx, which until recently was the bluest county in New York State and one of the bluest counties in America, now hit 28% for Trump. These are shocking results. And I think it's really important that we listen to those voters. In New York, they were particularly Latino, Dominican, Asian American, Chinese, South Asian. And what they're telling us is not always easy to hear as Democrats. They're telling us that they're very upset about public safety, about quality of life issues like homelessness, that they're upset with the cost of living and especially the cost of housing. And I'll tell you, if we don't hear them, and I'm going to talk about what we need to do to respond, then I think we're in danger of beginning to lose statewide elections in New York. And that's really scary. We could lose the next governor's race. Honestly, the last governor's race was pretty close. But this red wave has only continued. And if we don't respond, Democrats are in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, I think I live in Brooklyn, and I've seen some of it. You know, the fact that I've even seen Trump hats and shirts in this area is sort of was unfathomable 4 years ago. And you know, let's be clear, I don't see a lot, but there's sort of a creep. And you also saw, you know, with the Madison Square Garden rally, there were thousands and thousands of people there. So, Mark, how do we begin? Because obviously this is a long road, but how do we begin to dig out of this?
Well, first of all, this didn't start on November 5th. Really, for the last, I would say, 3 or 4 election cycles, we have seen a steady rise in votes for Republicans. We've had a creeping red wave in New York State. And the coverage has mostly been about what's happening on Long Island, maybe the Hudson Valley. I think even some New York City Democrats have underappreciated how much of this has been happening in places like the Bronx and Queens and Brooklyn, where Republicans have been slowly chipping away at legislative seats. We lost a city council race in the Bronx last year, which is crazy. A seat flipped from Democrat to Republican. So this has been building. And the truth is, when I hear Democrats say we have to change our messaging, I think it's not enough. We really have to offer substantive policy solutions that will yield results that connect to the concerns that I voiced on affordability, on housing, on public safety, on homelessness, on running a small business. These are the concerns these voters have. Democrats have, I think, good solutions we can put forward, but I think it's got to be beyond messaging. And I'm not convinced yet that the New York State Democratic leadership, New York City Democratic leadership, that my colleagues in government here are ready to do that tough work. We can, but it's going to be some tough conversations and really significant changes from the way we've been doing business until now.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. And, I worked in the state government. I was the chief digital officer for about a year and a half under the previous governor. So know a fair amount about the state politics. And yeah, I think that, and I've written about this before, I think we need a much stronger New York Democratic Party to actually tell voters what we're doing. And and we're going to talk about it in a second. We're going to have there are a lot of amazing things, like monumental, historic things that are coming to the city on affordable housing, on congestion pricing, and things like that we need to be able to message and get out. But it isn't just it's not just like setting up a Twitter account and firing it out. It's like being on the ground and talking to people and organizing too, right? And I think that now that this is creeping into into New York City.
I will say, to give credit where it's due, that whereas in 2022 the state party was, I think, largely caught asleep until just a few weeks before that general election, where I talked about how close the governor's race was. But in 2022, 4 seats in New York State flipped, in 4 congressional seats flipped from Democratic to Republican, which cost us control of the House of Representatives. That happened in New York, in a state which had largely forgotten how to run general elections, and certainly wasn't investing on the ground the way Wisconsin has under Ben Winkler. It's sort of the gold standard. But I do want to acknowledge that this year in 2024, I think the state party was aware of that and did invest more in the ground game. And as a result, despite a pretty disastrous year, we did flip 3 seats, actually 4, because we had won a special election that Tom Suozzi won a few months ago. So we completed the flip of these 4 seats back to Democrats. It wasn't enough for us to take the House, but it means that Republicans are going to have a razor-thin margin that I think will constrain them some, I hope, from some of the craziness. So this is, some people have concluded from the horrible results nationwide for Democrats, well, ground game doesn't matter. We had this great ground game. Trump had none. Look, maybe the rules for presidential races are different, but I got to say, in New York, on the ground, in these congressional races, what we did door to door did actually matter. We had great candidates, too, that ran great campaigns, but being there with the field offices, with the paid organizers, and also we ran hundreds of bus trips from Manhattan to the Hudson Valley, to Long Island, knocking on doors. All of that, in the end, made a difference in what was otherwise a very tough year.
Yeah, I have to say that just real quick. I have to say, sure. I need to give Governor Hochul and the state Democrats kudos for that, because they did see what happened in 2022, and they really got boots on the ground, really got a messaging game, put money behind it. I think for now, what I would like to see is that continuing in the off years as well. There is work to be done now to educate people, because we've got midterms coming up and we got seats we can grab too. But Rachel, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, so I have a question that I feel like one of the themes that I have been sort of clinging to, like a desperate child on a life raft, is that this was just a terrible time for incumbents in general, not just in the United States, certainly in New York. Do you see how much of what you're hearing and what you're seeing in New York in terms of some of these shifts that we've seen towards sort of like Republican candidates and things like that. How much of that do you see as just sort of a rejection of incumbency in general, and more like I'm mad at the system and you guys, because in New York, Democrats feel like the system. In Missouri, they are decidedly not. So how much of that do you think is a sort of a general reaction to sort of macroeconomic realities in New York, including, yes, the cost of living is high, it's crowded, it's hard to find a home for a single family and so forth?
I think it's both. I think it's a very tough time to be an incumbent right now globally. Someone said that it may turn out to be easier to win the presidency than to keep it, because no matter what you do, voters are going to be unhappy. And here in New York, we control every aspect of city and state government. That didn't used to be the case. We had Republicans in control of the state Senate, but now it's been a clean sweep for Democrats, which of course we fought for, and this is great. But the downside is when people are upset, they're going to blame you. And they have blamed the Democrats, not just because of national trends, but also because of issues closer to home, and a sense that they can't find an apartment they can afford. They can't find a childcare slot for their kid in their neighborhood that they can afford. They feel like they can't get to work on time, and also we have to acknowledge that they're concerned about public safety. This has been an area where I think Democrats have struggled both on messaging and policy, but it's real. People feel really upset about the state of public safety, which is fused with concerns about homelessness and the way that the crisis of addiction and mental health is playing out on the street. And Democrats are absolutely being blamed for that because we're in power, but also because I don't think they've loved what we're offering. And so I think it's also going to require that we show we can govern, because we're still in control here. We control the mayoralty, the city council, the governorship, the state senate, the state assembly. Everything's in Democratic hands here, right? So we have to show we can govern for the nation, by the way, because local government's all we got. Local government is going to be more important than ever. We have to defend vulnerable people here when they come under attack from the Trump administration, whether they be LGBTQ New Yorkers or immigrant families or women seeking reproductive care. We have levers that we can use to protect these people, and local government has to deliver. But it's not enough that we just play defense. We also have to be on offense, if you will, with programs to address the concerns that I've laid out. And if we do that, then I think we can win back these voters. But if we don't, then I fear we lose statewide elections in 2026, and that the repercussions will be long-term.
Yeah, I agree. And so let's talk about some of those things that are coming to New York City. First of all, you are a champion for affordable housing. If you follow Mark on Instagram, which you should, he talks about this a lot and shows projects that are underway. But I want to talk about the City of Yes project that is either across the finish line or just about there. I think the mayor finally gave his thumbs up on it. Can you talk about, because obviously housing, it directly affects crime, homelessness, all of these things. So, I think a lot of times people talk about adding police, which in some instances, sure, I'm sure that makes sense. But combating root causes of crime I would argue, is a far more effective way to make a city safe than to just, basically be overrun with law enforcement everywhere. I'm curious to hear you talk about that.
Well, we can get into depth on public safety and policing, but on the housing front, I mean, you're right. It touches everything. Housing impacts physical health and mental health and employment prospects and domestic violence. And it's just a question of whether people have a future in New York. And right now, young people who grow up here don't really feel like they'll be able to afford housing in the neighborhoods they grew up. And this is, of course, directly contributing to the homeless crisis. And there are families today who are living doubled up because they can't afford a place of their own. And this is way beyond a problem just for people making minimum wage. because the rents right now are out of control, averaging $5,000 a month in Manhattan. And that means that a bus driver can't afford to live in Manhattan, a nurse or a teacher. So this is working class, middle class families can't afford to live here. It threatens the future of New York. And it cannot be separated from the fact that we've had a dramatic slowdown in the construction of housing here. And you don't need a degree in economics to understand what that does. There's so little supply of housing right now. The vacancy rate is at a half-century low. It's 1.4%. But if you look at, which is pretty close to zero, right? You think about, okay, there's a move out maybe, and they need a couple of months to renovate it and get it rented again. That gets you to 1.4%. But if you look specifically at the most affordable apartments of $1,100 a month or below, the vacancy rate is 0.36%. I thought that was a typo. It's impossible almost to find affordable apartments here. And it's because so few come online. And when a market rate unit comes available, there's bidding wars for rental units. We haven't seen that in New York. We're famous for bidding wars on co-ops and condos, but we have bidding wars on rental units. Who's going to win those? Obviously, the people with the most money. And so low-income and working-class New Yorkers are just getting shut out of the housing market. How is it that we're not building more? We have this fundamental contradiction, which is, if you ask people generically, do you want more housing? In New York, they say yes. 99%, that probably polls 99% favorable. But as soon as you propose a project on a specific block in a specific neighborhood, then people often come out against it. And that's just the way housing politics have worked in New York City, really for generations. And it's resulted in very little housing production. So look, there's parts of this that are out of our control, but like interest rates are very high. That certainly has been a negative factor in housing production here. We don't control that, but we control the rules around housing. And those rules, AKA zoning code, are really an obstacle. The last time we had an update on the zoning code in New York is 1961. And that was the time when the car was king. And they were actually redesigning even our physical, the built environment for cars over homes. And there's lots of ways you can see that in the housing code. So along comes this proposal to update this 1961 zoning code, to bring it into the 21st century, to unlock the potential to create more housing in every neighborhood of the city. And I disagree with Mayor Adams on a lot. I can talk about that if you'd like, but I have to say this is something that I agree with, and he has an amazing commissioner for land use, Dan Garodnick, who has led this, who's phenomenal. But this has been branded City of Yes, and what it does, there's a lot to it. I won't get into all the details, but it allows for more housing production through things like converting vacant office buildings to apartments. Now that's very relevant to me as Manhattan Borough President, because that's a big thing in Midtown. We got millions of square feet of vacant office space. And just so you understand how crazy the zoning code is today, the current rule is that only buildings built 1961 or prior are allowed to be converted to housing. So we've got all these vacant buildings in Midtown that were built in the 60s and 70s and 80s that can't be converted today because the zoning code prohibits it. We have neighborhoods right next to subways where you can't build dense residential buildings. We have these parking mandates. Remember what I told you about the history of the zoning code, which was passed in 1961. We have a mandate that residential buildings have a parking spot for every 2 apartments, even if those buildings are built right on top of a subway or within a block or 2 of the subway. And we have developers coming to us and say, like, I'm building in a transit-rich area, and I'm renting to people who don't even own cars. I could use that space and build more apartments. I would like to do that, but the zoning code doesn't allow it. So these are some of the things that just had to be updated, and City of Yes does that and more. And as we're recording now, it passed a major milestone. It got voted out of the subcommittee. This very obscure thing called the Committee on Zoning and Franchise. It passed 4-3, so it was close. But this obscure vote is really historic for the city. And by the time this posts, I expect we'll have had the full vote in front of the city council, which is the final big step. And I'm optimistic it'll pass. I guess it's not a total given, but I'm pretty optimistic. That will unleash, Tim and Rachel, the creation of 80,000 units in New York City. Now, I don't think I'll ever work on a housing policy that will yield 80,000 units. Hell, I have fights about building one building with 50 units in Manhattan, and when we win those, I'm happy. This is 80,000 units. So this honestly is a national problem, and every city is dealing with it. We're showing here in New York, at least with this one policy, that we can update our zoning code to unleash this, to overcome some of the resistance. And I'm really proud of the city council and all the leaders who stepped up to do this.
I mean, it's incredible. 81,000 units. I mean, I'm going to guess that it's been since at least the 60s that we've seen anything like that.
Correct.
In the city, and in a city that's population, I don't know what the percentage increase has been, but it's probably significant. So, I mean, that's incredible. Right. So kudos to you and everybody that's worked on that. And I know Governor Hochul and Mayor Adams have had a lot to do with that too. So hopefully we will start showing some successes with that. I want to shift over, and I'm glad you mentioned, Rachel wanted to ask a question about the offices, empty offices. I'm glad you answered that because it's such a big thing. So.
Yeah, and I'll just say really quickly too, for context for people that don't know how widespread, when Mark, you say this is a problem nationwide, downtown Los Angeles was like an anomaly in LA as far as like a place where nobody wanted to live, bar none. You know, there were areas in Los Angeles where they were more working class, and where there were certainly in like sort of the main grid part of Los Angeles. And the city council changed the zoning rules about 20 years ago so that these older, beautiful buildings could be converted. And now you can't afford a place to live in downtown Los Angeles because it became so popular and they had kind of a run on development. So, and also, LA needs to update also its own. It has the same zoning laws as far as parking is concerned, because of course it does, because it's Los Angeles. So just to get it's not just New York. This is a whole nationwide problem. All of our zoning laws were built to allow for the mass proliferation of the automobile, and a lot of cities are having, I think, buyer's remorse at looking at these like massive expanses to host all these cars that, you know, people aren't really driving as much as they used to. So congratulations. That is my question answered.
Let me say one more thing on that, because look, we have 90,000 square feet of vacant office space in Manhattan, which is an insane number. That's like the entire amount of office buildings in probably most other cities in America. Imagine if they were just all vacant. That's what we're dealing with here.
Right.
So we have a huge opportunity. We did this successfully after 9/11 in the financial district downtown in Manhattan. It is, in one sense, a great success story. That used to be a ghost town after 5 p.m. on a weekday. And now it's this vibrant...
I'm old enough to remember being like, should I be out here? Should we go home?
Yeah, totally.
Like, we shouldn't be here, right? Yeah, for sure.
But now they've had, I think, 30,000 plus apartments built in these old office buildings. So now you got vibrant life there 24/7. There's grocery stores and people pushing strollers in the parks, and it's very successful. But it was easier there because they're old pre-World War II buildings that are very narrow floor plates, and that's good for housing. Think about Midtown. Think about these behemoths from the 70s and the 80s, and like each floor plate's the size of a football field. So what they have to do in some cases is actually core in in the middle of the building and create a courtyard. It's very expensive. It can be done. There was another problem downtown, which is, maybe this is what happened in Los Angeles. It became all luxury. So downtown has no affordable housing in those.
Correct. That is what happened. A bunch of us at the time, this was a long time ago when I was doing some activism down there, we tried to fight it, but like, good luck being a group of grassroots organizers that are trying to fight like deep pocket developers like Harlan Crow and people like that, Donald Trump, for example. Like, it's really hard. It's really hard when there's a plat and they have a project and they've already met with, 5 or 6 people who are stakeholders and lawmakers and stuff in that district, and all they want is to be able to be like, I put a building on an empty parking lot, and it's tough. But yes, you are correct. That is a problem. And how are you going to solve it now?
Well, we have actually, I can't believe we're like saying so many good things about policy right now, because this is a rare conversation. But the state did something great on office conversions. And they have this very big tax credit that will help developers pay for things like, carving a core down the middle of the building, only if they reserve a significant number of the apartments for affordability. So we're going to get a ton of affordable apartments in Midtown Manhattan out of these conversions. This is very, very exciting. And it's going to create a vibrant neighborhood in Midtown, which is also going to have working class and low-income people who can find homes there. So it'll be diverse as well. So stay tuned for this. I think it's going to be a big success story.
I think it's incredible. And I'm just really excited to see these buildings start going up. So kudos to everybody. So we're going to move to a different topic, but on the same line of positive news that also will affect dense urban areas, which is congestion pricing. So congestion pricing it was passed, I believe, by Governor Cuomo first years ago, and then it's gone through years and years of, I'll call it, red tape, both from Department of Transportation, and there's been environmental assessments, and then it was paused briefly earlier this year, but it has been revived and it is back at a slightly lower price. But this will be the first congestion pricing plan in the United States. So, Mark, you've been a big proponent and a big supporter of this for years. Can you walk us through why this is such a big deal and how it will work?
It's a big deal. It's also controversial. I think it's okay to talk about that and why. But it's a response to some very serious challenges we have right now in New York City. We have really a double-barreled crisis on the streets, first of all, with congestion that's out of control. In Midtown right now, crosstown speeds are roughly 3.5 miles an hour, which is probably slower than you walk, Tim. And emergency response times for police, fire, and ambulance are getting longer and longer and longer. Like it is actually very dangerous, and it's hurting our economy and air quality and more. We have a second crisis underground or in our mass transit with a subway system that is totally out of date in many ways, that has signaling from the World War II era and has the oldest fleet of train cars in North America, and has 70% of the stations which are not accessible to someone using a wheelchair, and on and on and on. And we need a stream of revenue to invest in those upgrades. And congestion pricing helps on both of those fronts by reducing congestion on the street and by creating this stable source of revenue that can allow for investment and upgrades in mass transit, in our subways, in our buses. And it's a really big deal that it's finally happening. Scheduled to go online January 5th at a charge of $9 during peak times, much less in off times. It's been very controversial. There's no doubt about it, particularly for people in Manhattan. It's going to cover, if you know the geography of New York City, basically the lower half of the island of Manhattan, 60th Street south to the southern tip of Manhattan. So it's a big territory. And people who are used to being able to drive in for free are often not too happy about it. And I get it. But we're going to have in exchange for that $1 billion a year in revenue that will upgrade every aspect of our subway system, that will help expand our subway system. And, I looked at the numbers recently. We used to consistently build 5 to 10 new subway stations in New York City every year. Not as a one-off, but like for decades and decades. Consistently, over decades, we built 5 to 10 subway stations a year. In the last 34 years in New York City, we have built 4 subway stations. Not 4 per year. We have built 4 subway stations in the last almost 3.5 decades. It's really just disgraceful. This is a national problem, a country that has failed to invest in rail and mass transit. And honestly, it's been going on for decades. But I got to say, the Trump administration is indicating zero interest in mass transit or rail, which is really depressing. And also, by the way, in the campaign, Trump promised to kill congestion pricing. This is being demagogued to hell by suburban Republicans right now. And it's a tiny number of people who actually drive in from Long Island in their personal car on a given day during rush hour into Manhattan, south of 60th Street. Vastly more people take Long Island Railroad or Metro North or take a bus from Jersey or carpool with a friend or whatever. But you wouldn't know it if you listen to Republican Congress members from the suburbs who are just going to war over this. Meanwhile, I haven't heard anyone call for the cancellation of the toll on the Jersey Turnpike, which is $22, or the Garden State Parkway, or for that matter, the George Washington Bridge. No one's complaining about any of those, but the $9 during peak hours for the Central Business District of Manhattan, oh my goodness, that's being described in apocalyptic terms.
Yeah, I mean, it's silly. And of course, like, the Republicans are always going to use the outrage machine, which I will say they have done quite well and worked for their victory in November this year. But yeah, no, a lot of those guys I'm not taking seriously too much. But the fact is, like I said, I worked in the governor's office during the summer of hell, and that was right before we opened the 4 on the 2nd Avenue subway lines, which actually connected Weill Cornell to the rest of the city by transit, which was a big deal. But there is obviously much more to do. And the story that blows me away the most, and you kind of touched on this, is the signaling system in this city and the tubes that are used to power a lot of the city are so old that there is a team within MTA that when somebody retires, they literally have to train people on that 1920s, 19-teens technology in order to keep it running. This is 100-year-old technology. It is insane, and we need the dollars to fix it. Otherwise, when people rightly complain about their trains not moving, switching is a big component of this, and it requires dollars and shutting down. It's expensive, but like this billion. Go ahead.
Your listeners should look up what vacuum tubes are, because I'm pretty sure most people don't even know what that is. But it's what the transistor replaced. Okay, this is how far back this technology is. And if you go to London and you get on the tube and you missed your train, you look down the tunnel the other way and you can already see the lights for the next train coming. They call it headways. They have headways of 2 minutes, right? How can they run their trains so close? They have computerized control, right? In New York, we had this World War II era, which is not accurate. So you have to keep the trains far apart so they don't hit each other. If we can install computerized control on the New York subways, then you can run every 2 minutes. And we've done this on a couple lines, the L train, for example, and the 7 train, and they're running more efficiently. They have fewer delays, and they run closer together. But most of the system doesn't have it. This is the kind of thing that if we just had some money to invest in mass transit, we could drag the system into the 21st century. And assuming congestion pricing holds, because we got the attack from Trump and we have the lawsuits from all the Republicans, but assuming it holds, this is the kind of thing we're going to be able to invest in now.
No, it's great. And I am really excited to see it get off the ground. And like I said, as someone who worked on MTA issues for a little while, like, it is so desperately needed. And it will be such a value add to not just New York City residents, but also the residents in those suburbs that rely on taking New Jersey Transit and Metro North once they come in to use the subways to get where they're wanting to go. So I'm really excited to see that go. So I'm going to switch quickly to climate change, since we're talking about congestion pricing already. New York has experienced some really, really insane weather lately, and you've been very vocal about this. In fact, we have had brush fires, not just in Prospect Park, near where I live, where I smelled them for like a week, but we've also seen them in Manhattan as well. What's going on here, and what do we need to do about? I mean, obviously, we all know we need more climate adaptation and more renewables, but this is a completely different level for New York that hasn't, city residents haven't experienced climate change like this, at least since Sandy, probably.
Yeah, it's bad. We have had so far over 300 brush fires in New York City, and some of them have been really bad. Here in Manhattan, people know Manhattan. We have a park uptown called Inwood Hill Park. It's old growth forest, believe it or not. Yes, we have this in Manhattan, and we had 4 acres burned. I mean, these are not small events. We have another park uptown, which is not as well known, but it's big and gorgeous, called Highbridge Park, which had, I think, 10 acres burned. This is right in the middle of New York City. And it has consumed the FDNY and the Parks Department. It's taken massive resources. They have to pull in fire trucks from the river to pump in river water to douse these fires. Like, these are major events. Thank God we haven't had any that have leaped into becoming building fires. But it's a dense city, and parks are in the middle of neighborhoods, and that is certainly a risk. We've had, as Tim will know, we've had some rain here over the past week, but it's not enough. The drought is not over. This is just one more reminder that we kind of have a two-front war here. We have to fight to get this city to carbon neutrality, and we also have to fight to deal with the climate change that is already here. And I sometimes hear people say, you're focusing on resiliency and, you're taking your eye off the longer term fight to get to carbon neutrality. It's like, we don't have the choice anymore. It's here. I mean, November has made that quite obvious. Also the flooding, where we're over a decade past Superstorm Sandy, where we lost dozens of lives here, and lower Manhattan was underwater. Most of that coastline is not protected yet. We have some progress on pieces of it, but we're still very vulnerable to flooding events. We are an island off the coast of the ocean. And again, as Tim will know, we have flooding events just from rain. Forget about the tides from the river. Like, we've had rain events where the New York City subway has been shut down because we've had waterfalls underground, right? This is New York City. This is extreme weather. This is happening more often. This is directly related to our failure to bend the curve adequately on climate change. And New York City has a big role in that. Like, our buildings are voracious consumers of greenhouse-based energy and fossil fuels. And we have some legislation in place that's going to change that, which I can talk about if you want. But we're also part of the problem. And all of us have to push beyond our comfort zone to electrify everything, buildings and transportation, and to fix our waste stream so that we're composting instead of sending to landfill, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, while also building resiliency against flooding and against brush fires and all these other terrible consequences that we're already experiencing.
Yeah, could you talk about some of that legislation? I know there are some things with building codes that I know have been done, and I mean, we had like last year, I think it was in September, we had a rainstorm. There was 5.5 inches of rain in like 2 or 3 hours. That I was in Brooklyn, and I literally was taking my son to school, and water was over my feet. I mean, it was just insane. And I was in Park Slope at the time, so literally, it's Park Slope for a reason. For folks that don't know New York, it is on a slant or a slope, and still the water was coming so crazy. So what? Gives New Yorkers some hope on legislation.
This is life or death, by the way. We've had heavy rain events where people have died, especially in basement apartments where the flooding comes so fast. So this is no joke. But I guess I'll give a good piece of news on this, which is we passed a bill back when I was in city council in 2019 that really put New York City ahead of the world in dealing with the single biggest source of greenhouse gas energy use in our city, which is not transportation. People are surprised. It's not the cars, it's not the buses, it is our buildings. Really, 70% or 60 to 70% of non-renewable energy use is from our buildings, right there. You think about the heating and the lighting and the air conditioning and all of that. This legislation, it's local law 97, will require that buildings get to carbon neutrality, and has very aggressive milestones, some of which are starting to hit. And it can happen by just energy efficiency. It can happen by transitioning off oil heat to electric. It can happen when our electrical grid itself is greener. We're now bringing in transmission cables from hydroelectric power in Quebec. These are multi-billion-dollar projects, but that means that we can light up a Midtown office building on totally green hydroelectric electricity, which is just incredible. But it turns new construction. This problem is solved. Any new building going up in New York City, they're incredibly efficient. They're totally green. But we have literally 1 million existing buildings. That's actually the number. And a lot of them are dinosaurs. And they need to be retrofitted. And that's really hard. And once you do that work, it actually saves you money because you have a lower electric bill or a lower energy bill, but you might have to spend a lot of money to do the conversion. And so now that we're hitting the milestones, it's hard. It's been very hard. And there's calls to weaken it or slow it down, and including from residential co-ops and condos. I don't know if you live in do you live in a co-op, Tim, or you live in a single family?
Yeah, a very small one, but yeah.
So I don't know if your building is small enough that you're not hit by this, but I think the cutoff is 25,000 square feet. Anyway, look, there's co-ops which they're not wealthy. They're not on Park Avenue. They could be in Harlem, and they have to spend $1 million to convert from they have an old 100-year-old boiler burning God knows what kind of dirty oil, and they have to convert to electric heat. Now that could cost a ton of money they don't have. And in the end, they'll be better off because who wants an oil boiler in your basement? But it's a big undertaking. So this is tough work, but we got to do it. And when we do, I think New York City is really going to be an example for the world.
I love it. And I've even heard some discussions that I think this was the Times a while ago that some buildings are getting creative with even like injecting carbon into the cement that they're using, and then taking it to a facility where people are actually thinking that that cement is actually is slightly better than regular cement. So there's some possibilities there, which is really exciting. Well, Mark, we got you for 10 more minutes. So there's one really important thing, and I think we need to cover, and it's immigration. And, obviously Trump has announced quote unquote mass deportations using the military. And, we have a very large immigrant population here in New York. What do we need to do to give these people the information they need to be safe?
Look, families here are scared. And we have a lot of mixed status families where one person's a citizen, one parent maybe has a green card, another parent maybe is undocumented, or some other mix like that. So this is going to tear apart families in New York if they do anything like what they have threatened to do. And we do have tools at our disposal to help protect people. And we're trying to ramp up now with legal assistance so that everybody who has a chance to strengthen their status now has an attorney to do it, so that at least legal resources are not the challenge. And there's all sorts of questions on the extent to which NYPD will cooperate with the federal authorities on this. But I mean, my God, if Trump is threatening to send the military in, these are, I can't believe I just said those words. I mean, these are almost incomprehensible circumstances. So, we're trying to strategize right now on what we can do to protect people. But this is a pro-immigrant city. This is an immigrant city, right? All of us, 99% of us, are descendants of people from elsewhere. And It's what's made New York City what it is today. It's what's built this city. It's what's given us our energy and our vibrancy. And we value it. And I'm absolutely confident that the current wave of arrivals are going to be good for New York City in the long term, just like every other wave has as well. It's been a challenge to manage in the short term, but I talk to these migrants, and every single one of them asks me the same question: how can I work? They want to work. These are families who crossed a continent on foot. These are very resourceful, determined people. And, there have been some horrible incidents of some very alarming crimes committed by people who turned out to be migrants themselves. But we've had 200,000 people arrive. And, in a group of 200,000 people, maybe 0.1% are bad apples. And that's all Fox News focuses on. But the vast majority are people who want to work. They want to pay rent. They want to pay taxes. I've literally been told that by people. I want to pay taxes. And they're going to be great for the city because they're an important workforce. But we just need to protect them now in the midst of this horrible attack potentially coming from the Trump administration.
Well, and I think what's crazy, and I don't know if this number holds in New York, but I think there's a stat somewhere that says that undocumented immigrants commit crimes at about 1/4 of the rate of an American citizen. Like the fact that the fear mongering on the right about this is just patently false. I mean, I think New York has seen a large influx of migrants, and as you said, it is difficult to manage tens of thousands of people who arrive at any one time. But our crime rates, compared to when they were during COVID, are lower. So this notion that these people, like you said, are here to work. Also, I don't know how we're going to build all those affordable housing units if all these people get removed from the city. I don't know who's going to work in the restaurants. I don't know who's going to do all of these jobs. Like it's mystifying to me. Take out the cruelty, which is the worst part.
You should also add healthcare and education because technical provisional nursing, whatever that's called in New York, I forget. And teacher's aides and people like that typically are people that don't have 4-year degrees. So that is a very popular career path for DACA recipients and for the children of undocumented parents. Yeah. So, people need diversity amongst their labor class, or people just stop. The economy comes to a grinding halt. So
well, and there's another part that is huge that people don't talk about a lot, that undocumented migrants could contribute about $85 billion a year, $85 billion a year to Social Security and Medicare, and they don't receive the benefits. And you're taking that out as well. So there is no humane reason to do this, and there is no economic reason to do this except for fear mongering. And I am glad that we have local officials like Mark and others who are going to stand up for these people. We've got amazing reps here. I'm hopeful the governor will be there with us, and the mayor as well. I think some of that will be true. We'll have to see what happens. But, Mark, you've been a great leader on this. And I think this is a great note to wrap up on because we're at our time. So I just want to thank Mark. Thank you so much for taking the time. I so wanted to do an episode on demystifying New York City and telling people that this is not what Fox News says, where everybody's running with their hair on fire and you have to wear a bulletproof vest everywhere. So I really appreciate it. If you have any closing thoughts, feel free to go ahead. But it's been a pleasure having you on.
I have one closing question that will, if I could tee you off. So you, New York State and city have its own share of problems that are unique to it because of the size of the state, the population size, the size of your city, and so on and so forth. One of the problems that you do not have is a virulent Republican-led state legislature and state executive that has sort of its version of owning the libs is to attack the Democrats that run the cities that generate all the revenue for the state itself. That is a huge problem that we're experiencing now in various cities in the Midwest. St. Louis is one of them. We are far from alone. What do you think that civic leaders can do to not just combat the vitriol that we've already talked about, just the stupid cutting off the nose to spite the face positions of the Trump administration on things like congestion pricing and these other things that just kind of boggle the mind. But what about what do you think civic leaders can do to protect themselves against their own state leadership? Because that is kind of the new normal, right?
Yeah, I read about this in other parts of the country, and it worries me. We had to deal with this for a long time in New York State, and we did have a Republican governor for 12 years under Pataki. We had a Republican majority and later Republican-controlled upper house of our state legislature for most of the last century, honestly. And it was maddening in a state like New York, where New York City generates the massive outsized portion of tax revenue for our state. But look, we do have Democrats in control now of all arms of government. That doesn't mean we're not under attack from the suburbs, and sometimes even from people in our same party. So it's still challenging. But look, cities are the economic engines of this country. They are the cultural powerhouses of this country. They are engines for opportunity. They're the place where people from around the world have been able to come and make a better life and start a business and get an education and contribute in beautiful ways to the future of this country. And I'm proud that that is the history of New York. And we have challenges today. There's no doubt. We've talked about some of them. But you probably won't hear this on Fox News, but we had 62 million visitors last year, and we're going to blow that out of the water in 2024. We have amongst the lowest crime rates of any city in America, including Republican-led cities as well. You won't see that on Fox News. Yeah, we have challenges here. I face them with open eyes. But this is a great place to visit, great place to live. So if you're watching or listening from around the country, come on by, come visit us, come stop in Manhattan, come say hi. You're going to love it.
Excellent. And I echo that. Please come here. And Rachel will be here at some point. So, Mark, maybe we'll get a chance to say hello.
I will indeed, yes.
I would love that.
It'll be 66 million plus one in 2025.
Thank you, Mark. We really appreciate you taking the time. We know you're a busy guy, and you obviously have lots of important things to do. So thanks for talking to our listeners. We hope you have a happy Thanksgiving, and we will hopefully do another one of these with you in the future. We'll have to do an update on New York City at some point.
I would love that. Thank you, Tim and Rachel. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye, guys.
Today's episode was produced by Rachel Parker and Tim Fullerton. Audio, music, and engineering by Chris Lombardo. Our assistant producer is Lizette Nolasco. Find us wherever you listen to podcasts and watch entire episodes on our YouTube channel. Sign up for premium content and more at politigoodpod.com or email us at hello@politigoodpod.com.